the military dictatorship sent Korean troops to the Vietnam War and more severely persecuted Jehovah's Witnesses for their conscientious objection.
병역 거부자들에 대한 처벌이
Punishment of conscientious objectors intensified after the coup of May 16, 1961. While those who overthrew the government strengthened the military, more severe persecution resulted. Before then, if you were arrested and served a prison term once, that was the end of it. But from then on, the prison terms got longer, and you were never released from military service. When you got out of prison, you received another draft summons. If you refused to bear arms again, you'd be put in prison again. Then you received another draft summons. So by the mid-60s, some were put in prison 3 or 4 times. In 1969, when I was in my second year at the Chungnam University Medical School, I received my first draft notice. Then I spent 10 months in prison. I received my second draft notice in February 1974, and I spent 3 years in prison. During the court trial, the judge asked me why I refused to go into the army. I was about to respond to his question and barely said 10 words. Then the judge said, "That's enough," and stopped me. I got a 3-year sentence. Other prisoners were allowed to work in various fields, but Jehovah's Witness inmates, over 20 people including myself, had to remain within the cell for 3 years. So literally, we stayed within the cell for 3 years. On the day I was released after 3 years in prison, a conscription office agent came and arrested me even before I walked out of the prison. When I walked out of the prison, my mother was waiting for me out there. But the conscription office agent took me to his office even before I had a chance to touch my mother's hands.
I was terribly shocked. A car suddenly showed up and a man in a black jacket got off and walked into the prison. He soon walked out and my son was walking behind him.
But in my case, without any draft notice, they arrested me first, which was in fact beyond the law. Being arrested again, I was tried in court, and at that time I received a 4-year sentence. After receiving a 4-year sentence, I was overwhelmed and did not know what to do. My mother was sitting in the back of the courtroom. When I turned around and saw her, her face was all red and tears were flowing down on her face.
I always told myself, since my son already served 3 years, he will be back soon this time. But at the trial, the sentence was 4 years.
When I saw that, I could no longer control myself, and tears were in my eyes. There were judges sitting in the front. I looked up and rolled my eyes backward in order not to show my tears. That's how I received a 4-year sentence and served the sentence. Altogether, my prison terms were 7 years and 10 months.
이제 군인이 집권을 하고
Since the military came to power and sent out troops to the Vietnam War, Korea rapidly became a militarized nation, which tried to reduce everyone to the level of a private in the army or an elementary school student. The core issue of the militarized nation was the military, which was maintained by a conscription system. Since those who refused to bear arms resisted the conscription system, they became more severely persecuted. It was April 1st, 1975, when I faced the draft issue. The conscription office raided kingdom halls. While meetings were being held, they examined all men there one by one and forced all the men of the draft age into the military. Of course, no draft notice accompanied their induction. As a result, the military suddenly had to deal with lots of newly inducted people who refused to bear arms. Naturally, the military wanted to force them to compromise their conviction and become soldiers. As a result, severe violence and beatings followed. The beatings were so severe that several of my friends were beaten to death. One of my friends, whom I still remember, is Lee Chun-gil, who was the breadwinner of his family, his widowed mother, and younger brothers and sisters. When he refused to compromise, he was beaten so severely that his spleen was ruptured, causing his death. When he died, he was not yet sentenced, which means that he was presumed innocent. So he was not a criminal. He was beaten to death by the military police when he was not a criminal. Therefore, the government should have given compensation for his death. Nevertheless, such requests for compensation would not be considered. Nobody could even dare request such compensation. The entire compensation for his death was the military commanding officer's condolence money of about $10 that he sent to the funeral. That was all. Another friend of mine, Kim Jong-sik, was also beaten to death in a similar way at the well-known Nonsan military training camp. If he suffers as a Christian, let him not feel shame, but let him keep on glorifying God in this name.